Perfect. All right. Welcome everyone to the final event of USS 23, the anti-conference interactive roundtable. As it is an anti-conference roundtable, we will be having a conversation and more of a discussion rather than presentation. And finally, as it is an interactive block, we really urge you guys to raise your hands if you have any question, and someone will bring you a mic so that you can take part of the conversation and be part of the discussion. Thank you. Perfect. So we'll be starting off with some quick introductions and kind of everyone's path on the discussion panel. And we can start maybe with Lena over here first.
Hello. Yes. Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Lena Adel. I am a PhD student in the integrated program in neuroscience at McGill. And I did start off as a speech and language pathologist in Germany. So that's what I did for my bachelor's. I studied speech and language pathology. And then after a few years of clinical work, I decided that I wanted to try neuroscience and research, and then did a master's in cognitive neuroscience at the University of Amsterdam. And there I developed a research interest, especially in like interpersonal factors in therapy and in clinical contexts, and how the relationship that we have with our clinicians and our therapists has an impact on how well the therapy goes. And I started thinking about how we can possibly quantify that using neuroscientific methods. And that's when I started using hyperscanning. So scanning two brains at the same time with EEG, in my case, to see how brainwaves synchronize. And I'm also interested in all sorts of other biobehavioral measures of interpersonal synchrony. So for example, linguistic alignment, but also respiration, heart rate, all over the board. And yeah, that's what I'm studying for my PhD in Montreal now.
Hi, my name is Visou. We speak in English, right? Okay. My name is Visou Ady. I'm a business development specialist at Mitacs. I did study neuroscience. I have absolutely no expertise in AI. In neuroscience, I used to study cerebral cells in physiological context or disease context. I then switched to the visual system of cats, and studied how some areas work with each other and are being organized in terms of temporal signals and interactions by the thalamus. I'm saying names of brain structures. I hope that means something to you. So as a biologist, physiologist, I was really glad to be among the few that work on the brain, which I thought was magic. But with the development of AI, it feels like you guys are also trying to build another wizardy thing that I'm not sure to understand. And I hope you all understand or try to understand. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Happy to answer any questions, talk on different subjects, how those disciplines interact and how that applies in society, in academia, or on the private sector. Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia. I'm currently a PhD student in computer science at Mila or McGill with Blake Richards. I was actually originally in neuroscience and biological neuroscience, but found my interest getting sort of like maybe climbing the plane of abstraction, and moved from biological neuroscience to computational neuroscience, and eventually moved to pure AI. So I'm more than happy to talk about any of that. I'm also from the startup sphere in San Francisco. I started a blockchain company called Alexandria, putting books on blockchain. Happy to talk about sort of the interesting intersection between startups and AI research. Very fascinated by the founding stories of companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepMind, and want to replicate that in some kind of way. You actually mentioned, understanding this weird wizard of AI and looking inside and making it less of a black box. Like that's currently the research field I'm in, it's called mechanistic interpretability, or how do we map the internals of these models, like the internals of ChatGPT to its behavior, and can we develop like a discipline that looks a lot like neuroscience, but applied to these like very large scale neural nets. So I've been working a little bit with Irina Risch, who is also doing this research on large scale models. As we scale these models up bigger and bigger, are we able to predict emergent behaviors? Are we able to like look at the loss function and predict when certain capabilities will arise? Not only is this a fascinating like scientific question, I think very similar to like developmental neuroscience, but on artificial nets, like what are the training dynamics, but also an important question for safety, in that we're not releasing something into the wild that could have all sorts of capabilities that we're not prepared for. So thanks so much for having me, and thank you for organizing this.
Okay, then myself, my introduction. I moderated an earlier session, but my name is Charlotte Maschke. I'm the chair of the UNIC Student Affairs Committee. And just to give you a quick introduction about my background, I did my bachelor's in psychology back in Germany. I came to Canada and Montreal to do a master's in neuroscience. And this is also the time when I really, really wanted to learn more about AI. So I basically found myself in a graduate level AI lecture about applied machine learning between PhD students of computer science. And I was trying to install Python. So this is basically my way. And now I really got into the neuro-AI community. I do a lot of things for UNIC, and I'm really engaged in the message of neuro-AI. So just to tell you that I understand the struggle of how it feels like to come from psychology and to start coding, and how problematic this can be. And I imagine that for many people, you just have the inverse experience, where you come from an engineering background and you start to understand, to ask questions about the brain and like the brain areas that maybe mean something to you, maybe not. Maybe you just see the red blobs on brain maps flashing up, and you need other people to help you navigating this. So the purpose of this panel is actually to just navigate those kind of questions. And the reason we're doing this year is because last year we had a similar panel where we just had all the students participating in the conference in a huge chair circle, and we just talked about our experience navigating this transition from neuroscience to AI, or from AI to neuroscience. Today, we cannot move the chairs. That's why we don't have a circle. That's really unfortunate. But I would still like you to encourage in this discussion. So maybe we can just like start with a quick raise your hand if your background is more in neuroscience or psychology or a cognitive related field. Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot. Okay, so I assume some of you have already started to learn coding. Houting already knows how to code, okay. So maybe there's some people who are like just started with it and are facing some issues and are having like some trouble. And maybe we can just talk about what are the issues that you're facing. And today we're having this amazing panelists here, which have so much experience in transitioning between the fields, also transitioning between academia and industry, and having so many insightful comments to share. So maybe you can just like, someone can start with like some experience. What are the issues you're facing at the moment? Maybe like too many materials. Okay, there's someone.
Hi. Yeah, I can talk a long time about problems with coding. I would say the difficulties is basically everything, but just starting to learn the language. For me, I think it's maybe more on the theoretical side, because if I have to use more sophisticated methods of analysis, more complex models, statistical models, I don't even know where to start because I don't even understand the theory behind it. So that would be one of the difficulties. But on that topic, I think it's really important to have like a complementary team, and to each is on expertise. And that's how we can like make research progress faster, I think. If I explained the like psychological or neuroscience concept, behind the models, and the person that has the skills just codes what I want to do in theory.
I think that's a great solution of teaming up, and I think like finding complementary forces. If I can kind of hopefully guide you if you're ever interested in coding, I think a really interesting start is to realize like coding is a tool to get things done. So I think getting a project that actually interests you and getting it implemented and just coding that and pushing through, that'll give you already great experience. But then I think you also gain a lot by going back and understanding why you did what you did and at the various spots.
Maybe one of our panelists has something to say about like what it means.
I actually have something to ask. What exactly are you coding at this point? Yes.
It's personally the coding I can do on my own is like the basic like playing with tables.
Okay.
So that's but I used MATLAB in my master's to do model inversion using variational Bayesian analysis.
Okay.
So I actually used like pre-written scripts and I adapted them to my data set. So that was like my challenge to adapt it. And as I said, I had to learn and read on the theory behind variational Bayesian analysis to really like be able to adapt it properly to my code.
Okay, because I used to try to analyze data with MATLAB as well, right? And that requires some coding and things like that. So you learn that. And my question is, when you want to extend that and try to use AI tools, do you need to code extra thing? Is there a connection for neuroscientists that are using data and MATLAB to use MATLAB and connect that to AI tools? Something to help transition between like switching physiology data towards AI? And yeah, does that require AI, or are there tools available for well, to let you use the tools without understanding it necessarily?
I have if you want to go first, you can go. Yeah, I would just say like, I think in the day and age that we live in, there's just so many resources online that there's a lot of tutorials where you can kind of steal their code, plug it in, see how it goes, and then you kind of play around and then learn on the fly, right? And I think a huge component of it is also the language you pick to implement your AI. So for sure, if you're trying to work in C to get like C++ or whatnot to get some speed, you're going to have a way tougher time understanding what's going on and adapting that kind of code. But for example, Python has really been made to be super user-friendly and very high level of abstraction. So you'll have a better chance of getting code that you find online in Python. In MATLAB, the community I know in neuroscience and psychology is quite present. So you do have a pretty good chance there as well.
Maybe Sonia can also comment on.
Yeah, this is super interesting. So like I have a bunch of like weird like feelings around coding. I think a lot of people might. But like I was originally coming from neuroscience and just was so intimidated by coding when I was much younger. And I think a lot of this was just like actually just like cultural conceptions. Like I kind of like made coding seem a lot more difficult in my head than it actually was. So that was kind of interesting. A lot of it was just like getting over imposter syndrome. Like, oh, like coding is just like writing. Like it's just like a skill. Like the more you do it, the better you'll get. Like coding is still incredibly frustrating. Like this morning I spent 3 hours because like my Python interpreter was like pointing the pip packages in the wrong place. So it was like 3 hours of debugging with ChatGPT. And I don't think that'll ever go away. Like there are certain like bugs in coding that like no matter how skilled you get, you'll get faster at debugging. But the bug is just so idiosyncratic that it will keep coming up. But I think what was helpful for me was I kind of like fell in love with coding like very slowly. And this was largely due to just having a bunch of like positive mastery experiences, like picking like small projects and like executing on them. Also, like I do think the environment and associations are very important. Like as a child, I really liked to read. And this is partially because my parents encouraged reading. I would often have these like good memories of like reading in the summer while like eating a popsicle. And I think coding is similar. Like if you just create a bunch of really good memories of you coding, like doing things you like, listening to music that you like in an environment you like eventually you'll just start really, really liking it and become addicted to it. So that's more just like cultural advice than like the actual like technical content. As for technical content, like I often encounter people who think AI is like super confusing and super hard. I mean, on one hand, yes, like sure it is, but on the other hand, I think a lot of people, sort of, including myself, kind of like psychs themselves out as to how hard it actually was. And there's some amazing like educational content out there. There's all the neuromatch stuff, which I know like Patrick, who's in the audience, has founded. Like the neuromatch content is really like I found it super incredible in transitioning from neuroscience to AI. There are also some like amazing like AI teachers out there, like the Andrew Ng Stanford course is really good. Andre Karpathy's videos on transformers are really good. More recently, like Neil Nanda's videos on mechanistic interpretability, like how do we peer into transformers almost in a neuroscience zeitgeist and understand them. Those are super, super good. So a mix of like YouTube videos and Jupyter notebooks and ChatGPT has been like pretty good in getting to a point at coding that I'm quite happy with.
So I think I'm going to say something a bit controversial now, because I know that I'm in a room full of people who are into neuro-AI, but I don't know, maybe I want to put the question out there whether, like, in order to be in the field of neuro-AI, is it really necessary that you as an individual can do all of it? Because for me, for example, like with coding, you know, we've had a bit of a difficult relationship, I guess, like also coming from a clinical background, then being thrown into neuroscience, and then having to like do a simulation study of like hyperscanning EEG data for my master thesis because it was COVID and I couldn't collect data. I couldn't write a single line of code before that. And then I had to like code those simulations from scratch essentially. So yeah, I've gone through a lot with coding. I can do it, but I still don't like it. Like, and that's the thing, like I'm super lucky working in a very interdisciplinary lab where like a lot of people do really like it, and they are really good not only at coding but also at like very, very complex like AI things and machine learning and all of that. I have a clinical background. I'm a neuroscientist. I have an interest in philosophy. Like, you know, I have a lot of other things to kind of bring to the table. And I think that, you know, if you realize after some time that you don't love coding, that's also okay.
Yeah, I totally agree on it. It's like it's a valuable perspective. I just would like to add that even at the long run, every project is a team effort. And if you figure out you don't like something, you will find someone who is passionate about. If you don't try to learn it, you will never find out that you're passionate about something. And I, at the time, was clearly not really enthusiastic about starting to learn to code. I was clearly lacking the knowledge of what it is. As you said, it seems way too intimidating at the beginning. And I would maybe also add to what you said about the cultural aspect. I honestly was also clearly lacking a female role model who was coding. So like, I'm a woman and I'm coding. There was clearly a discrepancy between us at the time. So I just forced myself to start learning it. And on the way, I discovered how fascinated I am about this thing. And it actually like changed my career perspective, changed my life. It made me come to Canada, basically. So yeah, just to discover all that is behind this language, that it's a language, there's a like culture almost behind it, and all the creativity that flows into it. It seems like such a static activity, but it's actually a really creative workflow. It's a creative kind of like it's writing, and to come from point A to point B, you have thousands of different solutions, and you cannot come up with an even creative, like more creative solution. So yeah, this insight that coding something extremely creative made me completely passionate about it. So now I'm the one taking on coding things that other people struggle with. But if I would have outsourced it kind of at the beginning, I would have never discovered this passion about it. So even if it seems intimidating, try to learn it or ask other people to help you with it and to understand what they're doing and to learn like in communication with others.
So I'd like to just look at the other side of the coin and kind of see who in the audience comes from a computational background and is kind of try to entering the field of neuroscience, psychology, and all that stuff. All right. Okay, perfect. So, I mean, so I have a question for you, Visou. So for me, I have the kind of the same background where I'm coming from computer science and I'm trying to get into the neuro-AI field. And I think one of my big struggles right now is trying to pinpoint, you know, a subject or a topic I am passionate enough about to be spending multiple years on, right? And so I saw that for your postdoctoral research, you were looking at Purkinje's cells. Perfect. So I was wondering if you could talk to us about how you like kind of zoned in on this kind of cell you want to look at specifically.
Okay. The Purkinje cell and the cerebellum. I had computation neuroscientist back in my PhD that used to make fun of the cerebellum as the heating cushion for the brain. It's not as it's important and it's very useful, but it's super beautiful. If you look at the structure, it's like a crystal-like organization. The Purkinje cells have a rich dendritic arborization, but it's on one plan. It's not like a 3D thing. It's like on one plan, and the cerebellum gets structured all around this, and you have structures that neurons that go in parallel, perpendicular, and it's super good. And the Purkinje cells are so. I will come to your answer. So, yeah. So the physiology itself was super interesting. The development of this cerebellum, which was the part I was really interested, shows that the structure of the brain is one of the last to mature, at least in some of the models. And the way it matures, it allows the organism to adapt to a lot of changes. And the change of structure is dramatic during a really tiny critical window of the time of the developmental time. So that was really fascinating for me. And what I found was also fascinating for neuroscientists on the computational side, it was that it was also very interesting and kind of easy, if you simplify it, to modelize this. Because the Purkinje cell is one of the only output of the cerebellum. You have a huge input access. And so the variable and the more complex you made your model, the more interesting you would be to see how learning and adaptation can be modeled in the. So yeah, different aspects. I was more interested in the synapse, one of the synapses that happens in the cerebral cortex. But the more I was interested in, the more I found it beautiful, the more I found it fascinating. And through computational models, I found that it was a good model to understand a lot of other areas of the brain. So that's why I was interested in cerebral.
I think that's a great answer, right? Really, like you were just kind of found a little thread of interest and it kind of just pulled you and kept pulling you more and more.
Yeah. And actually for my first postdoc, I continued working into the cerebellum because so one of the projects I started, I couldn't finish it during my PhD. So I wanted to work with specialists in that specific phase and try to do different things. And yeah, so it's a great model.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a person who is from a computer science background, who's very comfortable with coding, and I can pick new tools up very quickly. But I'm a person who's like transitioning into research and picking up neuroscience. So for a person like me, what would be your advice and like practices which you would want to put up as pointers in terms of good research from an aspect of journaling, as an example, and any other things which you can mention here?
I think we have another.
Maybe they can answer the question.
So let me rephrase your question, if that's okay. As a computer scientist, what advice you would like to have in terms of how to approach biological data? Is that?
Yeah, more in terms of this is in general with respect to research practices.
Okay.
Mainly in the aspect I've heard, like since I'm new into this domain, I've been like talking around and like trying to get as much advice from people who are already been in the research field for a lot of years. And a couple of them have mentioned the aspects of journaling and other few like practices, which kind of like keeps you with your research and the ideas which you're like thinking about. So since you guys are experienced in the field of research, what advice do you have in these lines, on these lines? Yeah.
So some of like the best researchers I know just like read very intensely. Like their brains are often glued to Twitter because Twitter is like weirdly, I found it like weirdly effective in giving a big picture as to what's currently going on. I've often found that some researchers on Twitter have a better sense than some researchers who are not on Twitter, just because they've seen more of like the bird's eye view of things. So have a very good sense as to like where holes are in research, what will be relevant in 10 years and what won't be relevant in 10 years. I think that's the question that's on everyone's mind in AI research. I don't know about neuroscience because neuroscience isn't undergoing the crazy explosion that AI currently is, but there definitely will be some relevance here. That's one thing. The other thing right now is I'm like trying to bound like diving into these nerd rabbit holes of exploration, which are really good because it means you found something fascinating versus just like executing on something. Picking collaborators who are super good has sped up my progress a lot because we get into these positive feedback loops. So finding people that you just really like talking to every day and then talking about these concepts with them instead of like recursing by yourself alone over some concept, although in some contexts that's good as well. I personally have found like social media to be very helpful, but I don't think my answer is typical there in terms of like talking to people both on Twitter and like various online forums about this kind of thing. But I'm sure you guys both have like your own answers.
Yeah, I would say that, so you mentioned Twitter, but keep practicing discussion, I would say. Find people that you can argue with in terms of defending your idea, and also open yourself to their idea. That's also the best way that you will practice how to present your problem and how you can also be helpful for others with your knowledge. Like listening is also a good faculty that you should learn while listening to talks, speak, or someone like an intern, someone you supervise that you could help, right? So yeah, so that's that. Communication skills, I would say. I found that very helpful.
Yeah, maybe I can also comment on this, and then it's already time to finish with the panel discussion. But as one last comment, there are many people saying that it's way harder to transition from neuroscience to AI because you need to learn coding than vice versa. But I can definitely say that's not true. It's as complicated as transitioning from a background where you can code, but you need to learn the vocabulary of the brain, this whole massive complex thing. And more specifically, you need to learn to ask a question that interests you and that interests the community about the brain to then apply all the tools you know about. And that's an extremely complex question. That's basically the question of learning to ask scientific questions and to build your hypothesis. So what I can recommend you for this is just keep reading, and also read at really high level things like science communication and books that are just open to the, like accessible to the wide public, and just be open for every topic to become like one of your favorite topics. Things that you haven't heard about, like just read about them and get inspired, and you will see that there's some topics which just naturally interest you more than other topics. And if you see they interest you more, then follow this track and go more into detail, and you will find the point where you're really passionate about the topic. And then you will get more and more inspired to know how to apply your own tools. So I would say start broad with science communication and into many different directions, and then just follow your interest, follow your passion, and be really like, listen to yourself, what you like. And the same accounts for listening to people's talk, listening to other like students, PIs discussing, and follow your interests so you find a topic that you're passionate about and you can apply all your tools. Okay, so I think it's already time to finish this panel discussion. Maybe we just have one quick sentence from everyone, what you want to give those students on the way in their journey. Oh, there was one last question, but I think we're a little bit out of time. So, but there will be a social event afterwards, and little spoiler, there will be food and drinks. Sure. So maybe we can keep this question and get it around the social area.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm in the right position because I'm still a student myself, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to like keep like a sense of reality on what you're doing and while exploring still, right? Like, you know, acknowledging that maybe you're not going to be an expert in everything that you're intending to become an expert in, because you also have to adhere to like certain like deadlines. Like in academia, you always have deadlines. You always have another thing you have to work towards. And like, unfortunately, that sometimes is our limit there, right? So, you know, and that can be frustrating then if you think, okay, I'm going to do this, and this, and then in the end, you can only do like one of those things. So try to, you know, be excited about maybe only the one or two things that you have time to do at the moment. Yeah, but like I said, I'm still in the middle of it, figuring it out myself. So
yeah, as a conclusion, I would say keep track of what you're doing. Actually, it's time to time take someone with you and just try to discuss what you've been doing in your past. What's the thread that you've been following that you noticed or that you did not notice? So it's good to have. That's how I've kind of found a few things that I really want to continue, even if I stop research. I really want to be in the field where I could discuss with scientists and researchers and entrepreneurs that do something with their knowledge they gathered through science. So time to time, just take a few minutes to just do it on yourself or with someone, and keep track of what you're doing and look at it closer so that you can find what's really stimulating for you. It's kind of a natural positive reinforcer that you had in yourself and you didn't notice. And once you notice that, it helps to navigate what you want to do and select what you can prioritize versus what is not really your priority, what you're doing for yeah, I'll just finish there. Yeah.
I've recently been playing with this fun metaphor where how much is being a researcher similar to being like a rising pop star or like a rising musician? And there's kind of like a lot of similarity. Like you need to like focus on like your own art or like your own research and like actually genuinely believe in it to some extent. But there is some extent of like marketing or like branding it. There is some extent of like collaborating with others who you get along with to have synergies. There is an aspect of like technical mastery or just like mastering singing or mastering your instrument or mastering the craft. And I found this like actually like a pretty helpful framing where there's kind of like a variety of like skill sets, one that goes into being like a successful researcher. And I do think some of the skills get under indexed on, like, for example, like how do you brand your research? Maybe there's like a scientific communication aspect here, is something that's sometimes under indexed on, like what makes a good collaboration? How do you actually like cold email people or like walk up to people at conferences to like form those collaborations? But these are all things that like I became better at by talking to people who are more experienced than me. So if there's someone you admire, like, I guess like don't hesitate to reach out to them because like more often than not, well, depending on who they are, but oftentimes they'll respond and have amazing advice.
Okay, then thank you so much for you want to share something?
No.
Then thank
Okay.
you so much, our panelists. Maybe a round of applause. And this was already the last session of this conference. So I will just hand over to Chiara for some closing remarks, and then I can't wait to see you all for the social.